The United States perpetuates this daily violence and subjugation, not to spread democracy or human rights, but to extract resources and protect capital. This global empire does not only use brute military force to impose capitalism's world order. It's learned from past blunders of obvious coups and regime change wars that have come to define its naked imperialism. During the Cold War, they were pretty open about this, right? They were open about the threat of communism posed to this order. Today, the premise of the empire remains the same, but it speaks in a much different language, the language of humanitarian intervention and basically doublespeak, right, of humanitarianism, liberal interventionism, and so on. It cloaks its goals and control through hybrid war, methods of mass propaganda, and economic warfare through the use of sanctions, which they call soft power. Sanctions are administered with the pretense of peaceful coercion to bypass war, but the reality is that sanctions are war, and they cause the same amount of mass suffering and death, just with plausible deniability. Of course, sanctions are nothing new. We all know the horrific devastation wrought by sanctions during the Gulf War in the 90s. That killed 500,000 children. But in a post-9/11 world, the US system of financial weaponry has grown with extreme precision. The Patriot Act gave the Treasury power to sever ties between US economic infrastructure, which most of the world relies on, and entire national jurisdictions. This causes a profound chilling effect for all global institutions who opt to cut off entire countries rather than risk penalties. These sweeping powers are unconstrained and largely undefined, and have the power to decimate economies and leave countries in financial ruin. From 2000 to 2021, the use of sanctions increased nearly 1,000%. Leaders from both parties use them now as the primary method to force countries to fall in line. Trump dramatically increased sanctions on every targeted country, and Biden has pretty much maintained all of them. According to Biden's Treasury Department, they are the foreign policy tool of first resort. And today, US sanctions affect a third of humanity, with more than 8,000 measures on 42 different countries. Presidents no longer have to deal with pressuring Congress into voting for war, no, not because they would face any real opposition for doing so, but because they can cause debilitating harm against their so-called adversaries with barely any oversight or media coverage. When Venezuela's economic freefall, Cuba's food shortages, or Afghanistan's severe famine are even covered by the corporate media, the utterance of sanctions is almost always omitted in the context of why these things are happening. It's always just in a vacuum, right? It's always on the shoulders of those governments. At Biden's summit down the street, they're going to tell you that these sanctions are good and they're necessary in the interests of human rights and democracy. They're going to say that they're justified because they only target despotic leaders whose values don't represent ours.